Welcome back to this series. I know this series is going on for quite some time now. I haven't finished recording it, so I can't tell how many other parts there will be, but I really like the progress we're making. Now, by the end of this video, we'll have even more progress to show. We'll be able to see a bit more about the events we created. We'll be able to view the details and have a nice book button here. And we'll also be able to tell whether we are the creator of an event or if we can actually book it because we are not the creator. So a lot of tiny improvements. We'll also add a spinner and much more. Let's dive in. So back in the project, this is how we display our events. And if I do authenticate here, then we also have this extra box here, which allows us to create a new event through that modal. Now that's all pretty nice, but it would also be nice if in the boxes down there where I display my events, which I did create, if I had information like the price, if I had a button that allows me to view the details of this event, and maybe also some indicator that allows me to identify whether I am the creator of that event or if I can book that event, so if I'm a user who did not create that event. So that is what I want to work on now. And for this, here in the fronted part of the app, let's have a look at our events page. Because there at the bottom, we have the part, this one, where we render our event list. The event list here in turn is generated here. And now I want to work on that list and change what we display there. Now, React is all about components, obviously, as you know. And therefore, let's create a separate component for this event. So here in the components folder, I will also create a new folder, which I'll name events. You can name it however you want. And in there, I will start with an event list first of all, and then in there I'll have an event item. Now, it's up to you whether you like this one component per folder style. I like it, hence I organize my components like this. If you want to group more files together into one folder, feel free to do so. So I will create an event item.js file here, and I will create my event list.js file here in the event list folder. And I will also add my event item.css file next to the event item and my event list.css file next to my event list here. So this is the folder structure I want to work with. Now let me grab this event item here from the events.js file in the pages folder where we previously had it. And let's add this to the event item here by creating a new React component. So let's import React from React there and create a new constant event item where I get some props and where I in the end want to return my event item JS Xcode, and where I will of course export the event item as a default. Now here I'm referring to event ID and event title. Now these are things I don't have in my event item.js file, of course. Instead, I expect to get that via my props. So here I want to output my, let's say, props event ID, and down there I want to have my title. Now we will add more here, no worries, but for now that is it. In the event list here, I will also import React from React. I will have my constant event list, which holds my function that renders the JS Xcode for this component, and I will export as a default this event list. So this is the event list component. Now in there, the idea is to have this event list here. So let me copy that JS Xcode and move it in there. And now we can also migrate these styles. So in the events CSS file, I got that event list style, and I will grab that or cut that from the events CSS file here and move it into my event list CSS file. And I will also rename it to just event list and use that event list class here in my event list.js file. Now that's one part. I also, of course, have the styles for the individual list items. And you can probably guess where this will go. Of course, in the event items CSS file. So now I have my styles in here. Obviously, to use these styles, I need to import them. So in the event item file, I will import the event item CSS file here. And in the event list.js file, I will of course add an import that points at my event list.css file. With that, these components are added. Now the event list refers to an event list here. And with that, I don't mean that constant. It's just a coincidence that this is the same name. Now, to not clash with this constant name, I'll rename this to events. And now I actually need a full function body here, not that shorthand expression where I just have my return statement. Instead, now I need a full function body because I want to generate this events constant here, which should be my list of events. And for that, I expect to get my events here on my props here. So a prop named events. And then again, I want to map through that and do basically the same I did here in events.js. So what I do up here. And therefore, if you want, you can, of course, copy this part here. Let me grab that and move it over to the event list.js file, replace map with that map. Obviously, now the goal is not to have my li item being rendered here, but I want to use my own event item component. So we'll import event item from my event item file and their folder, and there the event item file. And then here I will return event item, where I now need to pass two properties at least, the event ID and the title, because that is what I use in there. So I pass in the event ID, which will be my event underscore ID, and the title will be my event title, so what I previously used here in the list item. Now I'm using my event item component. The event list component obviously should be used too, and there I will need to pass in my list of events, so of the raw data, not of the JSX elements. And therefore, let's now move back to the events page here, and I can remove that event lists constant, and down at the bottom where I had this list of events before, there I now want to use my new event list component, which you therefore need to import. So let's quickly do that. Let's import event list from, and then we go to components, events, event list this file here. So now we can use the event list component in this file, and I want to use it in my JSX code down there. So here, let's render event list like this. And as I mentioned in there, we'll need that events prop. And there I want to pass in this state events, so the events I fetched. So if I now save this, it should behave in the same way as before. If I reload, and it does. Now I'm missing that key prop, which I forgot in event list, where I do loop through my items. I need to assign a unique key here to every element, and I can't just use my event ID. So that is it, and that was a lot of work for the same result, I guess. But now we have that dedicated event item component, which groups this event item functionality in that list of event items. And here is now where I want to continue my work. So in this event item there, I want to output the title, let's say the price below it, and on the right side of this box. So here, I want to have the buttons that allow me to interact with this event. For that, I'll simply add a div in here and put my title in there, and I'll wrap the title in a h1 tag, which I guess makes sense semantically somehow. So let me close that h1 tag after the title here. And below that, I will have, let's say, a h2 tag where I output the price. So for now, I'll just hardcode this, 1999, something like this. On the other side, I'll have another div where I want to have the actions I can perform on this event, something like view details. So there I want to have a button where I see view details, for example. Or you could have something like edit or delete here if you're the owner of the event, if our API would support this. Though, just a quick look at our schema, we haven't added such functionality here. We only got the create event functionality, and we would have to delete or edit the event through the database through some graphical user interface connected to the database. Feel free to add it. I don't have it here and I don't plan on adding it right now. So I will have that view details button here, or if I'm the creator of the event, then I actually want to have, let's say, some text here where I say, you're the owner of this event. Something like this. Now, if I save it like that, we'll first of all see all these things. Here it is. And of course, the formatting is also not super pretty. Now, to work on the formatting here in event item, I will use display flex. I want to use Flexbox. And in case you don't know Flexbox, in the video description, you'll find some helpful resources we got for you. So I want to use Flexbox. I want to use the default, which is flex direction row, which means I'll have these items in my list item, which actually will be these two divs, sit next to each other. That is what I want to have. I want to have space between them so that the first div is all the way on the left and the other div is all the way on the right. And that can be achieved with justify content space between, like this. Yeah, so that should be a first step. We can see the general direction. Of course, I want to style like the h1 tag and so on. And we can achieve that, of course, with proper CSS. So here I can style the h1 tag in my event list item. I'll remove the margin there, for example, set the font size to 1.5 rem, something like that. Yeah, looks better. Let me also grab that color and maybe assign that here, that we color this in our main color. Now, this price here should be much smaller, maybe a slight grayish color, no margin. So this will be my h2 tag, which I want to target. So let me select the h2 tag in my events list item element here. And there I will, as I said, remove the margin, give this a font size of 1 rem only, and then a color of maybe not that gray, but something in that area, something like this maybe. Let's see how that looks like. Yeah, so that looks better. Now let's work on the other side here. I want to have that button, and I want to, of course, style on my, want to style this paragraph as well. Now, for the button, obviously, here in events.js on the page, we already got a button with the class name button, and I will reuse that class name here simply because that basically is the global button style I want here. So I will just give that a class name of button, and let's see what that gives us if it reloads. View details, that looks great. Now regarding that you're the owner of this event, here I will target the paragraph in my events list item. And I will remove the margin from that to see what that gives us. Better. Now some spacing theoretically would be nice here, but keep in mind that this here will only be displayed if we don't see the view details button. So we'll see either of the two. We just haven't added that logic yet. So with that, that is actually fine. There is one thing I want to change. On the events list item, this flexbox, I'll set align items to center all these items on the cross axis, which is here from top to bottom. You don't see an effect yet, but later when we display either this button or this text, you should see an effect. And speaking of that, let's implement that logic to display either of the two. So here, we basically want to display the button if we're not the creator of this event. And we want to display this text if we are. Now, how can we find out? If we have a look at our schema, at the event object we get back, we see we can get the creator. And the creator is a user. And in the user, we get an ID and an email. Now, that, of course, is information we can have in the front end too. In the app.js, where we manage our token, there I also manage my user ID. When I log in, I set that user ID. So we have the user ID on the front end, and we can fetch it for every event that we use. So on the events page, in fetch events here, I do actually get the ID of every creator. So that is exactly what I want here. So with that information, we got the ID of the creator and the ID of the currently logged in user. And with that combined, we should be able to display either the button or the text. Now, to get the ID of the logged in user, we'll need to use our context API. And here in the events page, I already did connect to that with that static type being set here. So I can just access this context, and then in my context, I should have access to my user ID. Therefore, here to this event list, I will pass in, let's say, the auth user ID prop, which is this context user ID. That should work. So I'm passing auth user ID as a prop to the event list. Each event has information about its creator anyways. And therefore here in event list.js, where I get that data, I just passed it on to an event item. So here I'll pass on my user ID, which will be props of user ID, because that's the name of the prop we just defined on the event list component. And of course, you could also directly connect the event item to the context if you wanted to. This approach, by using props, makes it a little bit more reusable. You could add it anywhere in your component tree, independent of whether it's inside of a branch that has access to the auth context. Kind of theoretic here, because our whole app has access to the auth context, but still, let's do it like this. And now I know whether the user is authenticated or not, or I got the ID of the authenticated user, and I can now determine if that is the user who created the event. So down there, where I only want to render the button if this is not the creator, I can access this props user ID, so props user ID, and check if that is equal to my creator of that event. So props. And now I will need to pass on that creator information, of course. So creator ID is equal to event creator. And then there we have the ID, right? That is what we fetched from our backend. So in the event item, I now have that creator ID, and I can compare that to my user ID of the logged in user. If that is equal, then I want to render this text. So let's render this text in this case. Otherwise, and this is a ternary expression in case you're wondering, so otherwise I'm rendering this button. Let's save that and let's have a look here when I reload and fetch my events again. I see view details here. And that makes sense because I am not logged in, by the way. Now let me log in here with the user who should have created these events. And you see you're the owner of this event. Now let me log out, and I see view details again, and log in with a different user here. Let's see if I did create that one in the past. And I see view details again. If I create an event now, let's say a snow walk for $9.99, and we'll have that event on January 13th at around 18 o'clock, so that's 6 p.m. A lovely walk through the cold snow. If I confirm that, here it is, and there I now am the owner of this event, which of course is correct because, well, I am. So I'm the owner of this event. I got these other events where I can view the details, and that's exactly the behavior I want here. Now, as a totally front-end unrelated side note, you might notice that the more and more events we add, the slower our API becomes, because right now our API is built in a way where we have many round trips when we fetch the creator of an event, because we basically make an extra request to the database to get the creator of an event for every event that we fetched. And we'll fix this later in this series. For now, I think it's still a speed with which we can work. But just in case you're wondering why this is getting slow, this is an issue which we'll take care about. So here I now got my events rendered. I can now see all the events we created, and I can differentiate between the events I created and events created by other users. Before I conclude this, I want to make sure that we can actually go to a details page and that we view a spinner when we're loading the events. And I also want to make sure that when we add an event, we instantly add it to the list of existing events and don't fetch all events again unnecessarily. So, a couple of things. Let's start with the addition of a new event. So in the events page here, where I have that method to create a new event. Here, the modal confirm handler. There I do create an event. And please note that I get back information about the event and, of course, of the creator. I don't even need to fetch the creator information here, because since this event was created by the currently logged in user, we can just take the ID of the currently logged in user. And now with that, I get this information back, and very important, I get back the ID as well, the real ID that was created on the server. And therefore, when we successfully added this here, instead of calling this fetch events, I can simply add my event to my current events. So I can call this set state and set my events equal to the old events plus the new event. And to do that, I will use the function form of set state, where we have safe access to the old state and can rely on the latest update being applied to our state. And then I'll get my updated events here, store that in a new constant, access previous state events, and basically just copy that list to not mutate my original events array. And to updated events, I will push a new event, a new JavaScript object, which should now be a valid event, of course. For that, if we have a look at fetch events, there we see I just push my events as I get them back from the server. So I have basically events in there with ID, title, description, so with these fields here, you could say. So we can also just copy these fields. And in this object which I push, we can add them. Now, the ID, as I mentioned, will be the ID of the currently logged in user. So context user ID. The title will be returned by our create event call. So here in res data, we should have a data field. Just as we have it down there, where I also access res data, data events. Now here I should be getting back res data, data, and then create event field, which holds title and so on. So here I should be getting that create event field, which then holds my title, create event, because that was the name of our mutation, of our query, therefore. And I can just copy that and do the same for the description here. And also for the date. And here also for the price. And then for the creator, well, that indeed will be a nested JavaScript object, where the ID will be this context user ID. Of course, it's totally wrong to use that up here. There, I want to use res data, data create event underscore ID. So I want to use that ID that was created on the server. So up here, we of course don't use the user ID. I think I was a bit asleep there. But here we do, and I don't really need to store the email. I'm not using it right now anyways. So this should theoretically push a new event to that list of events instantly. Let's give that a try. Let me log in and create a new event. Testing 29.99. Let's pick some date and time. This is a test. Not cancel. Confirm. Doesn't look like it worked. Yeah, that makes sense, because it's nice that I do update my events list here, but of course I should also return my new state object, or the data I want to merge with my existing state, where I do override the existing events with the updated events. So this is an important addition here, obviously, to set state. And now with that, let's try logging in again. Submit. And create another test here real quick. And I will soon clean up some events behind the scenes in the database so that this doesn't get too slow and we have a manageable amount of events here. Confirm. And I think this looks good, because we can see our test event here now. And we can also see that we're the owner of this event. So adding our user ID and so on seems to have worked. And we would not see that here appear there if we wouldn't have pushed it successfully, if we wouldn't have changed our events list or array here successfully, because I am not fetching events anymore when we added one, so it's definitely not from our database. So this is great. We now have all these events available there. Now we also display whether we are the creator, and I instantly add them here. Let's now also make sure that we have some loading indicators, some spinner or anything like that when we are loading. And for this in the events page, in the end, I want to manage a new state here. So in my global state object, I'll add isLoading, which initially is false. And I want to set that to true, for example, when I fetch my events. We could also set it to true when I added a new event and then show a spinner below that list of events. But for that, we would have to manage an extra state here, where kind of add some extra control for when to display which spinner where. So I will only display a spinner here when I'm fetching my events, not there, here in the fetch events method. And there essentially, right at the start, I will just call this set state and set isLoading to true. Now with that set to true here, I want to reset it once I am done. So here, once I got my events, I will set isLoading to false. And important, I also want to do that when I get an error, because even if we get an error, we're still done with fetching. So we'll set isLoading to false here. So now we have the isLoading state, and I will now use that to show a loading indicator. For that, down here, where I have that events list, I either want to show that list or, well, that indicator. A very simple indicator, of course, is some text. So here we'll check if this state is loading, if that is true. If it is, we can display, let's say, a paragraph where I say loading. And otherwise, if it is not loading, I want to display my events list here. So something like this. That is a relatively simple approach that should actually work. Here is loading. And once we got the events, that is gone. Obviously, that was not super beautiful, though. So let's work on that a little bit. Instead of just displaying loading here, I want to display a spinner. And for that, you can visit loading.io/CSS. And that should give you some beautiful CSS spinners. Here they are. And I will just go with this one here. And now you just need to copy this HTML code here and use that here, basically. And then you need to copy that CSS code here, of course, as well, and just adjust the colors and so on. Now, I will actually create a new component for that. So I will create my spinner component, a spinner.js file, and a spinner.css file, into which I'll copy that CSS code here. Now into the JS file, not JSS, I will copy in my my JavaScript code. So here, spinner. Obviously, we need to import React from React in here. Then I have my spinner constant, and that will just render this div here, and I export this as a default here. And obviously, I also want to import my spinner CSS file to apply the styling. Now that is all it takes to have a spinner component. We'll have to adjust the color, but for now I'll just render my spinner here, and for that I'll need to import it at the top. So import spinner from components, spinner. So with that import added in the events page here, I can use my spinner down there at the bottom and render it here. And now regarding the coloring, which I mentioned, I will use my default purple color here and replace white here with that color. And now it should look better. Now when this page reloads, we do see that spinner. Because I copied that HTML code, I have a little error. That should be class name here, not class. And I, of course, still want to center it. So I will actually wrap this into another div. Whoops. Like that. Which I'll give a class name of spinner. And then in my spinner CSS file, I'll target that class name, use Flexbox again, and then justify my content in the center and align items in the center to have a perfectly centered spinner, just like that. And therefore now when we reload, we see our spinner here. And after some time, we should see our events. Great. So that is the spinner added, that is the events added, and so on. Now, why don't we also display the real price here then, and the date, and then make sure that we can go to the details page. So back on the event item.js file here, this price is now still a dummy price, but obviously we can simply expect the price as a prop on event item, and then ensure that we pass it on here in event list. So I forward price by simply accessing event price, and I will also already forward the date by accessing event, not the price, but date here. Because if you have a look at our schema, you see that for an event, we got our date. And that is a string actually because it's stored as such in the database or fetched as such by GraphQL. So now date and price is passed on to the event item. Price is already getting used. And I want to output the date, let's say, right after that. There, I want to add a hyphen and output props date like that. Yep, I got my dates here. Now, of course, the date is not really formatted in a way that I want to use here. And to change that a little bit, we can actually wrap this into our date constructor and then call toLocalDateString, which allows us to format the date. And we could even pass in a local, so something like DE, to adjust the way it's output to the region our user is in if we fetch that first. If we just call it like this without any extra configuration, we still get output like this, which doesn't look too shabby to me. Now for the price, a tiny change is that I will add a $ sign in front of that. Now I want to be able to view details and see the details. And actually, I'll not do that in a new page, but in a modal, because we have all the data loaded in this page already. So I just want to open a modal, show the details, and give me the button to book there. Now, obviously, we already have our modal component with our cancel and confirm buttons, and I will reuse that modal here, basically. So in my event item here, when I click view details, I want to open that modal, but I'll not add that modal in here. Instead, on a click here, I want to execute props on detail. In the event list where I add event item, I now know that an item was clicked, and here I will actually bind props event ID. So I will pass the ID of the clicked event as an argument to onDetail here. And I use bind here because if I would directly execute it like this, then I would execute this when our JSX code here gets rendered, but I want to execute it when this click occurs. And with that, I just prepare the function to be called. I don't call it yet. So in event list, I now can add onDetail, which is executed when we click this. This is how we now pass it up. And regarding that modal, in events.js here, we already add the modal with our add event logic. Now, in the end, I want to render that other modal regarding the booking and the event details in the same place. So in event list, I will pass this event up one more level. So I will target props on view detail, and I'm using different names here to make it clear which component triggers what. And that's it. That will just pass on the data passed to this component to the next component in line. And that next component will now be the events page, where I do render my event list. And there I now have on view detail. And here I now need to hook up a method that is actually then passed down through all these components. And that will be a method here, show detail handler, for example, where I get my event ID. That is what I did pass up in the end. And here I now want to, again, use state to show my details. So here I will add selected event and set this to null initially in my state. And then in my show detail handler there, I will call this set state and set the selected event equal to the event with that event ID. For that, let me actually turn this into the function form so that I can access all fetched events. So here I will have my selected event stored in a constant. I get that from my previous state. There I have that events array. And there I want to find that event where the ID is equal to the event ID I'm getting here. So this gives me that event which we actually selected. And then I can return and set selected event in my state equal to that selected event I have here. So now we set this selected event, and this is also the trigger for us to open a modal if we have a selected event. Now, of course, not this modal here. This is our create modal, but a different modal. So we might outsource something into a different component, but for now I'll just add a new dynamic part in my output.js Xcode here. If selected event is trueish, so if this is not null or false or anything like that, then I want to open my modal. So just as I check for creating up here, I can now copy this code here for my modal down there and show it when selected event is true. Oops, like that. Now the title here will be, let's say, the title of the selected event. So this, whoops, and it's not this selected event, it's this state selected event. So this state selected event title, I want to be able to cancel and confirm. Confirming will be booking, and I'll add logic to change the text soon. On cancel, I execute this modal cancel helper. And this is really getting a big component here, as I see, but we can split it up later. Here, I'm setting creating to false. I also want to set selected event to null here because we execute this for both modals, and it's always correct to reset the creation and the select event mode, basically, or the selected event. In on cancel, here in my second modal, I of course want to execute a different method. I want to have my book event handler be executed or anything like that. So I will add my book event handler here. And then we'll have to do something in this method, but we'll ignore that for now. Inside of the modal, I of course don't want to render a form. And we should also close our normal parentheses there, by the way. But inside of the modal, I really just want to output information about that event. So like the h1 tag, where I output my this state selected event title. And well, then again, maybe the price and the date. So what I already do in my preview there, we can copy that from there, this h2 tag, like this. And the big difference, of course, will be that besides this same information, which we already have in our list, I can add a paragraph and also output this state selected event description. And of course, up here, props should be this state selected event. So now we have that in place. Let's see if that logic works. On view detail is a problem here in event list. No, in at the bottom of my events.js file. Yeah, there I of course wanna execute my show detail handler. That's the idea. Now this compiles. And well, let's now see what happens when I do click view details here. Now this is also my network being slow. Nothing, unfortunately. Let's check what's wrong. And my problem is an error I made here in the event item. When I bind, the first argument to bind, of course, is what this should refer to. And that doesn't really matter here, but I can't just set it to this. It's the second argument that will be passed on as the first argument that is then called. So the event ID wasn't passed up correctly. Now this looks much better. Now we can also close that and we can view the details, which doesn't look too bad. We can also tell that it really does load different event data here. Now, a little backdrop wouldn't be too shabby. We did add it before, so we should definitely add it again. So in our events page here, when I render the backdrop, I want to render that when this state is creating or this state selected event is true. So let me wrap that here in parentheses as a first or condition. And now as this reloads, yeah, that looks better. Now, of course, I don't want to display confirm here, but book. And to change this, I will have to adjust the modal a little bit here. In the modal, we need to make this confirm text settable from outside. So here I want to set, let's say, props confirm text. And that just means that in the places where I do use the modal, I need to pass a new prop confirm text. And for the first modal, that is just not cancel, but confirm. But for the second modal, which is my booking modal, there my confirm text will actually be book. And that is now important so that we can see book here. But if I do log in again, and I see that create event box here, there indeed it's still confirm. Tiny side note, I just saw that the spinner is actually on top of my modal. So in the modal CSS file, I'll add a set index of 100 so that this should indeed be above all the other elements in my view. So that is it though. That doesn't look too bad. We worked a lot on the events. Let's now continue with the bookings.